and welcome to Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast with Renae Hanvin, which is all about inspiring you to start thinking and doing disasters a little bit differently too. In this episode, I'm welcoming back Professor Daniel Aldrich. He's the director of the Resilience and Security Studies program at Northeastern University in the USA. He's also a volunteer on the Resilient Ready Advisory Group and a project delivery partner with us. And we're talking about bringing social capital and social infrastructure measurement to Australia. So a little bit about Daniel. Daniel P. Aldrich was born in upstate New York and spent his childhood and much of his adult life travelling and living abroad. While living in Tokyo, Japan, he began to wonder how Japan, the only country to suffer the effects of an atomic weaponry, could have built up in such an advanced nuclear power program. He wrote up his observations in the book Site Fights, published by Cornell University Press. In 2005, he and his family had their home, car, and all of their material possessions in New Orleans destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, and he began studying what makes communities and neighbourhoods more resilient. He published Building Resilience to share these insights on the role of friends, neighbours, and social cohesion after a crisis. After Japan was hit by the devastating triple disasters of an earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear meltdown in March 2011, Daniel wrote Black Wave about the factors that helped people and communities bounce back. He also has a new book coming up soon. So I like to start with where we met. I had heard a lot about Professor Aldrich, or Daniel, from a previous visit he made to Australia a number of years ago, and I was really intrigued to hear more about this so-called social capital concept. It wasn't until I was kindly invited to a small group conversation where Daniel was the guest speaker in Sydney, quite a few years back, that I saw and heard firsthand how important his research and focus on social ties is. Given Resilient Ready is 100% stakeholder-led, it was, well, on my part anyway, a case of people resilience love at first sight. I'm so excited to have Daniel back for another episode to share his focus on social capital, being bonding, bridging, and linking ties, but also on his other focus of social infrastructure, being the places where people connect. I'm really honoured to say Daniel has been a volunteer on our Resilient Ready Advisory Committee for over 4 years, and is a delivery partner on our projects, including the award-winning Kangaroo Island Business Climate Roadmap and Blue Mountains Business Resilience Roadmap. Right now, as we record this podcast, we are collaborating on a South Australian snapshot project. This is the first step in bringing Daniel's work to Australia. Daniel, welcome back for another podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So for our listeners who aren't across your work, and I don't know that there are many in Australia, but can you explain what is social capital and what is social infrastructure?
Yeah, social capital involves the bonds that tie us together. So all of us hopefully have family, we have friends, we have work colleagues, maybe we have hobbies as well, maybe bocce ball, petanque. People like to go out when it's not too hot and get some swimming on. So we have ties in different ways. And social capital tries to understand those in terms of what we call bonding, bridging, and linking ties. Bonding social capital connects people who are similar. The fancy word is homogeneous, so homogeneous social ties. Heterogeneous ties are the ones we capture with bridging social capital. That's the friends you make at a barbecue outside, or when you meet your new neighbors for the first time, maybe through work or through a kid's school. And then finally, linking social capital are the vertical connections we have to decision makers, your mayor, your governor, someone in power. And those social ties, where do we build them? Right? Where do they come from? So the places and spaces in our societies, libraries, parks, pubs, maybe churches and synagogues and mosques, those are what we call social infrastructure. Those are the places that build the social fabric that ties us together. And both of those are really important. Both social capital, the ties that we have, and social infrastructure, where we build them, are important because those really impact our daily lives and also our lives when something bad happens.
As you know, I'm such a fan about people connections and places that people connect, which is why I'm so grateful to be doing work with you. And back in 2022, you worked with us at Resilient Ready, although we were corporate to community then, on 2 projects focused on building business community resilience. And that's where I think you really saw firsthand my passion for the role that community organisations or non-profit businesses and also social businesses can play in building connections in communities and also being being places where people can connect. And if we focus on the Kangaroo Island Business Climate Roadmap project that I worked on over 15 months and we won an award for, which was very exciting. And you came with me to the island. I know who, first one we submitted actually. And you came with me to the island and met some amazing people who talked about their experiences. And I guess you brought the lens of social capital and social infrastructure to the conversations and to the project. So firstly, Fiona Jago, who's the former owner of the Western KI, Western Kangaroo Island Caravan Park. Can you share, what did you learn from her?
Yeah, Fiona's pretty amazing. So, oftentimes we talk about heroes, especially people we think in uniform, right? Police officers and firefighters. But here was someone who, because she's a nice person and she had the ties and she needed to have them, was able to save hundreds of people's lives, right? So Fiona was there during those really horrible fires on Kangaroo Island. And she kept asking the police every day, what should I do? I have lots of people staying over here, right? Some of them are less mobile. Some of them are more mobile. Some of them are foreign tourists who don't speak English so well. Should we evacuate now? Should we wait? And the police kept telling her, we can't tell you what to do. So at some point, Fiona took it on her own initiative, her own time, to call enough other parks and places around the area to get everyone out of there before the fires arrived. So because of her, because of the work that she did, the care that she has and the trust people had in her, people listened to her. When she told them to go, they did. And she asked for people to help a place to find for them. Other people found a place for them. So it's a great example, right? Here's a person who has built these bridging ties to people from around the world, Chinese tourists, people from Adelaide, people visiting from New Zealand, people like me from America. And she used the ties that she had to activate and save lives during that shock. And her physical space, the caravan park itself, was a great place for people to meet. Right. So now it's, for example, got workers who come through there. Back then it might have been more tourists who were coming through. But again, her spot itself, the place where people sat down, they have a barbecue, they see the koalas in the trees. Those are places and spaces where people built ties. So she really embodies this idea that during a disaster, it's more than just having a government, for example, that's involved, or having something like insurance. Neither of those would have been helpful to you. Even if you had, a government, whatever, some kind of plan or an insurance plan, that wasn't what saved your life. What saved your life was someone like Fiona. So it's a really good example of someone who embodies social capital and social infrastructure.
And I think, and just for those who don't know, Fiona's actually sold the caravan park and left Kangaroo Island, and she's actually now working with Resilient Ready as a lived experience facilitator, going out and talking about her experiences and what she did and what she has planned from a business perspective as well. But I think if you connect it into that, bonding, bridging and linking ties. So to me, her bonding ties is a family-run caravan park, and there's local people there that are very, I guess they live the same way. As you mentioned, her bridging ties are, into the customers and the suppliers that can't come and drop off things, and the customers that she's literally saving the lives of. And then the linking ties are, from my understanding, her into the emergency services and the government, so those people in, power or roles of authority. And I think it's a really great example whereby there's strength in Fiona building strong linking tie connections, but there is absolute necessity from government and emergency services building connections back into, and I'm not saying it's down, but back into people like Fiona who, for the western part of the Kangaroo Island, there's not many people there. So they need to know who Fiona is and have really good connections with her.
Exactly. And again, think about the people staying with her, right, where they couldn't get information from the police. They got work and action from her. So again, someone who that they trusted what the information that she gave them. And again, able to save all the lives of everyone in the caravan, get them to someplace safe in time. So it's not often you can point to someone and say, this person's a lifesaver. But with Fiona, we can.
Yeah, 100%. And then another great couple that we met on KI was Peter and Lisa, and they're from Kangaroo Island Coffee Roasters. And they had a little caravan that served coffee that they take around the island. And what did you learn from them?
Yeah, really interesting story. So again, we often think about businesses as sort of not interesting. Everyone's got a business. What's the big deal? But oftentimes these business owners are the key in bridging between different groups. I remember they told me a story that less than a week after the fire, they had an older farmer inside the store there, and they had a really nice business where people from outside the store could donate money, and people who came in for food, which was in short supply, and coffee, probably also short supply, could get that for free. Local residents who'd been through a lot. So that was really nice. But they noticed he was looking down. They asked him what's going on. It turned out he had burned his hands actually during the fire and really needed to get stuff going on the farm. He had a lot of water needed to irrigate the crops with, but he himself couldn't turn the fields spigot back on. So they knew, because they'd been doing this now coffee serving for several days, a whole troop of Australian soldiers who were in town to help out. And they said to him, is it okay if we bring in some big guns, so to speak, to help out? And thanks to them being this literal bridge between a local farmer who couldn't get his work done and these soldiers looking for a job to do, they had the water flowing in that farm really quickly and made it really possible to get everything done. So again, a great example. We often don't think about the importance of local businesses, local entrepreneurs. These are individuals who, again, get the trust of their customers and hear what's going on in the community. Again, the soldiers had no idea what needs were in the community, and maybe local residents didn't know who was even there to help them. They're too busy focusing on their own problems. So this is another good example where that physical shop, the physical coffee shop, whether it's mobile or sitting in place, was a site of social infrastructure where we built these ties. And again, really helping out someone in need who knows what would have happened to his livelihood, right, if a whole season had gone by without getting that crops being watered.
Yeah, 100%. And I've heard you share that story so many times, and I guess I get goosebumps every time as well, just because of the difference that connections do and can make. So you and I are now collaborating on a very exciting project in South Australia where we're developing a snapshot report on what social capital and social infrastructure is and what it could be for the state. Part of the project is that me and my Resilient Ready team are doing a desktop review at the moment of existing policies and programs across government and non-government organisations to look at social capital outputs, I guess, and outcomes and measurements, etc. So what do you think it is? Now, you haven't seen any of this because we're doing the hard work for you and then sharing with you our findings. What do you think it is we are finding across government and non-government research at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, really important to think about South Australia's policies here and the way that they fit more broadly into things like SafeCon. So I had the chance a few different times to speak to colleagues from a variety of these emergency organizations working there locally. And I think, recognizing what our work is doing, Resilient Ready, putting social ties at the front of what we're doing is a critical element. I also see the recognition of volunteerism and people from the community themselves getting involved. Our motto, your motto has always been doing disasters differently. And I think, part of that start is recognizing true recovery only begins from the bottom up. No matter how good intentioned government plans are, they're a government plan, meaning they're not being built or run or even sometimes consulting with local people. So when you have volunteers and you have residents getting involved, that's the base of that. And then you have, of course, the local first responders. You have fire, police, all the other services as well. And those ideally are from the community and connected to the community. So this is not just, bringing in a random person who's going to parachute down, right, and do some work and walk out again, but really important critical elements of the process. So that's one aspect of this is the degree to which these organizations themselves are connected to the work that they do. I also think it's important that we step back from that, right? I think realizing many organizations are beginning to understand the role of social capital. Again, not a language we usually hear from first responders, from disaster managers. Oftentimes the work is about, let's say, infrastructure or technology. The newest app, for example, I heard a lot of talk from organizations when I was there about getting people to install more apps. I think I asked someone if they installed every app being developed across Australia, how many would there be? And they told me more than 11 different disaster apps. That's a lot of things on your phone to be scrolling through, right? As there's a fire or a flood or something bad is happening. So I think the more we recognize that technology has a role, of course, in our lives, it has to. But at the same time, what really is going to build up both our interest in building the community itself, but also our ability to do that comes from our ties in real life, from people that we know, maybe overlaid with digital technologies as well. So maybe we have a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group or whatever. But knowing your neighbors, knowing other businesses nearby, that has to be at the base of a real process. I think part of the work that we're doing is really putting that front and center, recognizing the social capital has to be there. And finally, I think, that part about this is digital connections. So many people nowadays really are on their phones. They are on platforms, whether it's whatever we have nowadays, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and so forth. And that's really has to be a recognized part of what we do, that we have to see that people are building both in real life, IRL, as my kids would say, but also in digital spaces, right, building these kind of connections. So I think those are all critical elements of the kind of work that's serious.
Yeah, 100%. And you're so right. So just tapping back into SafeCom. So Miriam Lum from SafeCom, I think he's just an absolute true thought leader in the resilient space. And the Stronger Together strategy, which I know is coming up for review this year, one of the 4 quadrants, like really front and center from, 5-6 years ago, is community connections and networks. So even back before Professor Daniel Aldrich was a thing in Australia, she recognized, I guess, in that systemic component of building resilience that you have to have connected and networked communities, which is why I'm really excited to be, collaborating with South Australia on this project. And I also think you mentioned about digital, and we had a forum or an online session just recently, and digital connections was asked. And I know SA Costs, or the South Australian Costs, did a report on digital connections last year that we're also really excited to be including in our desktop research, as well as all the intel and the great programs and policies and procedures that the emergency services have. So CFS and MFS and SES, etc., and SA Pol, etc., because there are some great initiatives around community connectedness. And I very much see, I guess, the little CFS out in rural countries, the fire station, that is a hub of connection. So that is a social infrastructure place that's really important for some of those regional communities as well.
Yes, exactly.
So given we're doing a bit of research into looking at policies and program development and delivery relevant to social capital and social infrastructure, the big gap to me is that and in Australia, there is no definition of what it is, and there's no measurement of what it does, so that we can then identify, well, what else can we do, or how can we strengthen it or expand it? So what's the key difference in doing things that connect people, i.e. we are doing community connection programs, and actually measuring it?
Yeah, so this is a real challenge, I think, for many of us in the field, which is even if you talk to someone about social capital and they say, yeah, that's a great idea, you say, okay, great. So, what is your organization, local government, whatever, doing to actually map that and then build it? So many people are doing things to some degree that are building connections. So even, again, having a barbecue outside, helping your neighbors out when it's too hot, carry the groceries in, right? Those are great examples of things we do all the time, mundane activities that build ties, going to the library with your kids, going outside with your dog. But the challenge is systematically measuring what's going on. So, I remember my time in Australia, I asked every state I went to, which was a few, okay, so tell me about the way that you're capturing social capital here. And they might say, well, we're not really capturing it ourselves, or we had this survey we did about a decade ago, or we have a pretty good idea because we've talked to some local people. So one thing was, even inside the states themselves, there wasn't a lot of agreement on what was social capital, how was it measured. And of course, we want to know more than just our own state, because we want to know, so, okay, are there certain states doing it well, certain states doing it better? If I'm measuring social capital using one measurement, and you're in some other place and using a completely different measurement, we can't even talk about that on the same page. So, part of the challenges that I see still across Australia is that, one, very few states have formalized or embedded a regular measurement of social capital into what they do. And then the challenge then is, even if they have done that, which I have not seen, then getting everyone to agree across the states, right, to a broader plan. Like, we all can agree, how do we measure income? Right? Or maybe something like happiness, right? So even these relatively vague ideas, right, we can capture them. So here as well, we should be able to sit down, right, as people who agree that this matters and figure out how to do it. So one thing is starting with an agreement. What are the reasonable ways to capture social capital and social infrastructure at maybe a local level, then a state level, and then build up a national framework? I think for me, that would be a critical element, right, in building something that makes sense across the state.
Well, stay tuned, because obviously we have hopeful, fingers crossed, other funding mechanisms, because the Snapshot project in South Australia is that first step, them as a thought leader state in, looking at I guess, a bit more deeply social capital and social infrastructure, with our intent is absolutely to create a national definition and national measurement metrics that are relevant to every state across Australia and inclusive of every state and territory across Australia, but measured in a collective approach, so that we're not doing one version here and one version there. So that's in the pipeline. Now, you're actually going to be back in Australia in May 2024 to run a forum in Adelaide and an online one for us for this South Australian snapshot. And the forums, really, we're going to present the findings from our desktop research, and then I'm doing a load of stakeholder interviews this month. And then we're going to co-design. So the forum's kind of an interactive one. We're going to co-design with the participants and really create a definition for what social capital and social infrastructure could be and should be. For South Australia and then the wider Australian, as we move the concept nationally, like, where do you think this snapshot project could go? So if we're starting by just sort of, what could we call it? And then, what could we measure? Like, where's it going to go?
Yeah, I mean, my ideal plan would be in the same way that, a good fire department or a good police department really knows their community quite well, knows, for example, fire risks, let's call them hotspots. So an ideal map, both at the micro level, at the state level, at the national level, would let's call them cold spots of social capital and social infrastructure. We know from oodles of research now, for more than 2 decades, that the communities most vulnerable during disasters are those ones that are not well connected internally or externally. That is to say, horizontally, I don't know my neighbors, maybe I don't trust them so much, I don't leave my house, and vertically, I don't really trust the government, I don't get involved so much, right? Those are the communities with the fewest access to resources, new ideas, collective action, all the things that matter during a shock. So the ideal place, I'd love to see this happening soon, would be when first responders think about, okay, we know there's a fire coming, there's a typhoon coming, there's a flood coming. Here are the areas that we know, thanks to this kind of mapping, that are the most isolated, the most disconnected, the least likely to have someone to turn to. This is work that Eric Kleinenberg did qualitatively for a study of a heat wave back in Chicago where several hundred people died. It wasn't just being vulnerable. That really doesn't make you so in danger. It was being vulnerable and alone. Those two things together. So being elderly and alone, for example, being a newcomer and alone. So again, you might have, if you have great connections, you're probably in great shape, right? I know my parents are they're a lot older than me, but very actively in a community. They have a lot of good neighbor connections, so I'm not worried about them. It's the kind of people who say things like, I wish I knew more people, I wish I had friends nearby, I don't know anyone on my block. Those can be worried about. And ideally, what this map can give us and give first responders and everyone else is, even for a neighborhood to know, here are the areas we need to be working out for. Here are the people who need more help. Here are the communities that we need to be investing in. That'd be the ideal. If we can't do that level, which is sort of the getting ready stuff, at least we should be able to know, here are the warning signs we can all be looking for in communities, right? Here are the things that we can capture with publicly available data. Here are the things that we can publish a map. These are the blocks that we think have the fewest people connecting to each other or trusting each other, so that people in the neighborhood can know, we might want to do something. Have that barbecue, have the outdoor event, call in Renae and the Resilient Ready people, do something like that, right? Because again, this is not just a thing for governments to be working on, right? This is not just a government job, and that's a really important thing to recognize here. This is a job for each one of us to do, each community to do, and you can't do something unless you know what you have, right? If you think you're doing really well, but the reality is you're the only person on the block to anyone else, that's not social capital. That's not, and if you think the one place that you like is your nearby Starbucks or whatever, not in Australia, sorry, that was a faux pas there, your nearest flat white provider there in your block, but that's the only place that you go, and they're only open in the mornings. Not a great sign of social infrastructure. So the more that we can do, both at the government level, which of course matters, but also at the community level, to give these tools to everybody so they can think about, okay, we are missing some ties. I don't really know my neighbors as well as I should. Or even comparison, right? Oh my gosh, I spent some time in that community in Adelaide. They're really connected, but now my community here in Sydney, compared to them, actually, we don't know so much. So what are they doing there? And then maybe call them or get information from them and say, what are best practices going on in Adelaide or best practices someplace else that could inform what we do. So this mapping has to be the basis for what we do. It's too often we do stuff without recognizing, where is our level of that resource? For example, if I want to borrow from the bank, I better know how much money I have available to pay the mortgage, right? If I want to get my kid educated, I should know what kind of maths do they know. So in all these other areas, we assume it's normal to know where we're holding these areas. Social capital, social infrastructure, these critical elements, most of us are just guessing.
Yeah, 100%. And again, that's why I'm so excited to be bringing it to Australia and obviously collaborating with you. And I think, though, you mentioned before that obviously it's not just the role of government and it's, it's everyone's role in communities. And I really think, my passion is obviously, community organisations and social businesses. But I also think that the likes of corporates and in particular our critical infrastructure, so like water boards, telco providers, power boards, banks, all those corporate organisations that really are fundamental to, I guess, a community surviving and an individual surviving, I think they have a really big role as well. And when I think about, like water boards in Australia, like everyone has to have water, whether you're a household or you're a business, right? If you don't have water, then you're not going to survive. So to me, those organisations, whilst yes, they're providing an essential service, they're connecting into us and they know who's in the houses and they're sending us bills and they're sending us information. So I think they also have a big role to play in being part of the holistic social capital and social infrastructure approach as well.
Exactly. And this is one of those moments we talked a little bit before about businesses, right? And the role of organizations in the broader process. So here as well, right, this corporate utility is one that connects to almost everybody. We hope, at least, everyone's on water infrastructure right now. So there's already a connection in place. There might be already communication in place. Maybe water readers are coming by, information about how to save water, right? So this is an organization, water providing, that we know already has ties into the community, a critical infrastructure provider. So we want to think about them and engaging with them, helping them think through the ways they connect to ties and businesses as well. We also want to think about more broadly, just again, not just local businesses, but regional and national businesses as well. To what degree are their employees, their members tied into the communities where they work? So, an ideal business isn't just providing a service, right? They're also providing trust during a shock. They might be providing critical resources that we all need. Water is certainly among them. So yeah, I think this is a really good idea, right? Think about how we can think, incorporating these kind of organizations into the broader mapping projects and also into the kind of work that we do.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I have a big corporate background. So for me, the role that corporates and, I think of postal services, I used to work at Australia Post, et cetera, can play, I think is just absolutely fundamental. So it's not just a government and it's not just a community problem. I think it's multi-stakeholder as well. So apart from getting to work with me and catching up with my dear self every time you come, what do you love about coming to Australia?
Wow, lots of stuff. First of all, I love the linear reserves. One of my favorite activities in the morning is taking a stroll. And, you kind of feel like you're out. For me, someone who's basically a city person, very much an urban child, the chance to walk, for kilometers in these really green paths and no, not even 2 blocks away, right? If I need to get a flat white, I can get one around the corner. It's fantastic. So I love that element that so many cities in Australia incorporate nature seriously into what they do. That's one big thing. I also love the diversity in Australia. I just remember pretty much any taxi, cab, Uber, or anything I rode in a bus, I would meet people from a variety of nations. I love the way that Australia has tackled the idea of migration so seriously, and recognizes the power that we come from diversity and diverse thoughts. And again, the idea that we're building social capital. Also, I've also noticed the sports that I fully lack comprehension in, like cricket, which with its wooglies and centuries and everything else. So right near my house in Australia, for example, there actually was a full sail kids cricket thing going on, which I would just stare at for hours. So for me, there's a lot of fun things to do when I'm there.
Well, when you come over in May, we'll have to try and get you to a footy match. Have you been to an AFL match?
I've watched them on TV, but I've actually never been to one live.
Yeah, we'll take you there. So right. I always end my podcast with a final question. What would be the 2 things you'd like to be done differently in the disaster space?
Yeah, the first would be incorporating both social capital and social infrastructure, not only into mapping, but into the plans themselves. Are the plans that we have for disasters helping social capital, building those ties, maintaining them? Sometimes we do stuff by accident that can cut them and damage them. Separating communities, for example, putting people into housing far from friends and family. So easily thinking through ways that we embed both those attributes, social ties, the connections that we have, social infrastructure, the places that we meet, into disaster and recovery, and also putting them on the map in terms of investments, right? Oftentimes, again, we think about disaster preparedness in terms of physical technology or physical infrastructure, right? Building roads, building fire breaks, whatever. The reality is these are often looking very mundane things, like local businesses, parks, pubs, libraries, places that we might overlook when we're thinking about the importance of building resilience to shocks. But a lot of our research shows these are the core elements, right? The ties that we have, the places that we build them, we cannot invest too much time in them. And again, think about it, disasters may never come, but the quality of life you get, right, from having strong connections, from having trust, knowing people nearby, feeling comfortable in your community, feeling a sense of place and community, that is a huge boon in peacetime. And of course, those exact same ties and places will save your life during a disaster. So, making sure we all recognize the degree to which these are investments that are absolutely worth every penny.
Yeah, 100%. And again, obviously, I was hoping that you would say something linked to that, because obviously that's what I'm really excited about collaborating with you on and bringing to Australia to embed across the disaster life cycle. So it's not just about the during and the after, it's really about setting up those connections and those places of connection before. Professor Daniel Aldrich, thank you so much. I'll have to invite you back, no doubt, for a third podcast. But a big thanks to Professor Daniel Aldrich, who has been talking to me about bringing social capital and social infrastructure measurement to Australia.
Thanks for having me, as always. I'll see you soon.
I hope today's episode of Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast, has inspired you to think a little bit differently about the role you can play before, during, and after disasters. Given the new era of more frequent and compounding disasters that we are now in, let's work together to build an all-hazards disaster resilient future for all. Find out more about the work I'm leading as a social enterprise building disaster resilience at resilientready.org. Don't forget to subscribe to Doing Disasters Differently, the podcast, through your preferred platform. And we'll see you next time when we discover new ways of doing disasters differently together.